Once again, I was inactive. My agent was Minna Wallace, the sister of Hal Wallace. It was that which probably also helped me get my start at Warner's. Minna told me that Metro Goldwyn Mayer was going to make Romeo and Juliet. This was what I had been trained for at Northampton. No one knew as yet, including myself, how good, bad, indifferent, perhaps one day great, I might be as an actor. You have to have the roles. You have to have the chance to grow. I was hopeful I could get into this picture. I had the English accent, training and manner usually helpful in Shakespearean plays. The agent sent me to see George Cukor, the director. He was a friend of Lily's. The producer was Irving Thalberg, already a legendary figure in Hollywood. Thalberg had chosen his wife, Norma Shearer, to play the part of Juliet. John Barrymore was to play Mercutio. Basil Rathbone, with whom I had just worked in Captain Blood, was Tybalt. Romeo had not yet been cast. I went to the MGM lot to see Thalberg. It was lunchtime, and I borrowed around on the lot, looking at the sets where Greta Garbo and Jack Gilbert had made their pictures. In the distance, I saw someone on a park bench in Shakespearean costume. I strolled up. The man was half asleep, his eyes opened slowly, like an owl's. He transfixed me with a hard stare. I started to pass on, but he straightened up a bit and cocked his left eyebrow a bit, a gesture for which this man was famous. "Ah, a glorious day, is it not?" he boomed. "Magnificent," I agreed. He pointed to the space on the bench beside him. "Pray be seated, fellow voyager." Penetratingly, he went on. "Haven't I seen you somewhere, my friend? Perhaps in some other life?" It was a tremendously rich voice of command, music, charm. I well knew who he was. I told him a little bit about myself. "I know who you are. You're the young bastard I saw in the rushes the other day." I inhaled a familiar scent from his breath. "Scotch. You remind me of Navarre," he said thoughtfully, frowning. "Do you mind if I call you Navarre?" "Not at all." "Glorious country, California," he said. "Too good for these cloddish bastards who inhabit it." I mentioned the Far East, for no reason. "Ah, yes, Navarre. What you say reminds me of a place where I once strangely content. Kuala Lumpur, Malaya." "How so?" "Never shall I forget that whorehouse in Kuala Lumpur. It was one of much integrity." I told him of my preference for those of Marseille, and one or two about Saigon. He gave me a piece of advice, very solemnly, as if he were reciting a soliloquy from Hamlet. "When you go to a house of joy, Navarre, always take the madam. The quality is better, and the price more reasonable." He exploded with a reverberating laugh. A voice behind us said softly, "Mr. Barrymore, sir. They're waiting for you on the set." He rose to his feet, swaying with dignity, though. I sprang up. I shook my hand. He took my hand. "Navarre, our talk was most illuminating. We must see more of each other." Off he went. Subsequently, but not until 7 or 8 years later, John Barrymore and I became close friends. I didn't get the role of Romeo. The late Leslie Howard got it. I was full of ambition at the time. I wanted to create something important. I couldn't forget my training at Northampton, where I had played everything. I couldn't forget that no matter what role I performed, the audience liked it and seemed to like me. Why couldn't I get the chance to play a variety of roles here? But I couldn't. As the months, the years, frolicked on, and as I went from one picture to another, the stereotyped roles I played stamped out of me my ambition to do finer things, or to expect to be able to do them in Hollywood. When you're young, a beginner, you have a contract to fulfill. You have little to say about your roles. They are tantamount to legal orders. You're hooked. With time, I would lose my inner guts, my belief in myself, even as an actor. I do not know to what extent this stereotyping of me, this handing me a sword and a horse, as they did from then on, led to my rebellions, hijinks, and horseplay over the globe, but I think it had plenty to do with it. I remember fondly the day when I first met John Barrymore, when he got his role in the Shakespearean play, and I sought one. Dear John, I made a couple of pictures at MGM. Maybe they weren't world shakers, but I enjoyed working with them. The atmosphere on the Metro lot was friendly and different. Yet I was unable to get together satisfactorily with Warner Brothers. Even after Captain Blood made several $1,000,000, I was only getting about $500 a week, having signed a long-term contract. Try as I did, I couldn't get Jack Warner to give me a more reasonable amount, although it was said I was the studio's biggest moneymaker. After endless hassles with Warner's, I was assigned to star in a picture in which the third lead was getting paid more than I was. I didn't show up for the first day's shooting. They rang up Jack Warner right away. "What's the matter?" he screamed. "Is he sick, or is he drunk?" "No," they told him. "He said he'd rather not work at all than work for so little." Over Jack Warner hung the Damocles sword of the money-making Captain Blood. He thought this over for 3 full minutes. Then he had a heart attack and was taken to the hospital. I still did not show up at the studio. The Warner brass were having meetings and fits, how to handle the problem of the upstart who was demanding big star money. Jack got home from the hospital, but he stayed away from the studio. Finally, we got together. My salary jumped sharply to 4 figures a week. I was ready to work in pictures. Through 1936 and 1937, Olivia de Havilland was the girl in many of my pictures. She was my sweetheart in The Charge of the Light Brigade and in Four's a Crowd. It was around the time I was in the comedy Four's a Crowd that I became labeled as a swashbuckler. At the time, this griped me, but today, what's it matter? Joan Blondell was my leading lady in The Perfect Specimen. I had earlier made a second film, Don't Bet on Blondes, with Claire Dodd. There was Green Light with Anita Louise, and Another Dawn with Kay Francis. Then The Prince and the Pauper. You went from one picture to another swiftly, a month or 2 or 3 for the making of each. There'd be a half-dozen pictures in the can, and you'd be making your 6th or 7th, with the others not yet released. Then they'd release them, one after the other, every month or 2, and you found yourself a household word, famous all over the movie-going sphere. Dodge City with Olivia, and Dawn Patrol with David Niven. Steady Work. The Sisters with Bette Davis. During the making of Captain Blood, I'd grown very fond of Olivia de Havilland. By the time we made The Charge of the Light Brigade, I was sure I was in love with her, so that acting in that hard-to-make picture became bearable. It took a long time to produce this vehicle, and all through it, I fear I bothered Miss de Havilland in very teasing ways, though I was really trying to display my affection. Olivia was only 21 then. I was married, of course, unhappily. Olivia was lovely and distant. She must have actively disliked me for the teasing I did, for I sprang some very obstreperous gags. There was the time she found a dead snake in her panties as she went to put them on. She was terrified, and she wept. She knew very well who was responsible, and it couldn't have endeared me to her. It slowly penetrated my obtuse mind that such a juvenile pranks weren't the way to a girl's heart. But it was too late. I couldn't soften her. Later, she told me that she lived in terror of what bit of idiocy I'd spring next. Guess I haven't changed much. Pranksters don't. I must have spent too much of my early life with men. I had a lot to learn about the sensibilities of young ladies. Late in 1937, I completed the making of a super costly The Adventures of Robin Hood, the first film, I think, in color. Another Jack Warner gamble. There were great expectations for it around the studio, but I was tired. The hard work, the round of social life in Hollywood, my trying personal life with Lily, all this was a drain. I developed a disgust for the mediocre vehicles to which I was assigned. Beyond that problem and my efforts to get more money and putting up with Lily's jealousy and desire to totally control me, I had other urges to contend with. The sea raged inside me. At night, when I fell asleep, there was within me sometimes a cerebral mechanism as of the sound of ocean waves lapping at the shore. I had grown up with the ocean pounding on the rocks, and it had lulled me to sleep as a boy. I wanted to be out on the salt water again, for one large portion of me was the mariner. I had still difficulty realizing I was here in the mixed-up world of Hollywood. The pretty women everywhere dazzled me. Lily was so violently jealous that I suppose she loved me. With my wandering eye, I did nothing to help her overcome her fits of possessiveness. She may even have been impressed by my professional realization, which suddenly was exceeding hers. But when a pretty girl went by, I learned to keep my gaze as fixed and glassy as that of one of the guards outside Buckingham Palace when she was around. I felt trapped, even asphyxiated, by her possessiveness. I had to get away from her. All around me, the whole world beckoned. Every structure of society was open to me. I had to see it all, be part of it, have nobody hold me down. The pressures upon me made me very frantic. Maybe I was slightly drunken with my success. The contrast in my living was almost inconceivable. Only yesterday, living with aborigines, tramping with white suit, white helmet, and boot in the jungle. And now, the whole universe seeing my face on the screen and fan letters by the thousands coming in weekly. I feared for my sanity unless I could do something about all this pressure. That was the greatest fear of my life. Ever since I was a boy, I feared more than anything else losing my mind. Once in Tasmania, I went with a boy named Charles Rattan to the hospital of which his father was the superintendent. Dr. Rattan managed not only the hospital, but the Tasmania Lunatic Asylum. Charles had me look through a porthole of the door. I gazed inside at the sight of a poor devils banging their heads on the wall, uttering weird sounds in strange postures. Shocked, I turned white with fear. The sight became a nightmare that lived on with me in the jungles, on board the ships I mastered. The nightmare followed me to America. Now I had the curious feeling that I was distended to the point of breaking. Yet I had to keep up the jaunty facade. Lily made me melancholy, deeply unhappy with my newfound success. I felt that I couldn't chuck it all and go back on the bum. I continued to philander among Hollywood's beautiful girls, and our only moments of peace were when we were in bed. Outside of that, there were sparks at every utterance, baleful looks. Towards the close of 1937, I knew I had had it. Our fights were not only a local scandal, but were becoming a national one. The journalists threatened to boycott Warner Brothers if they didn't get at least one scandalous item a day about us. Feeding those fellows was one thing to them, but to me it was something else. It was eating my heart and spirit. I couldn't stand it much longer. I felt dread creatively. I felt dead creatively, and there was no possible way of knowing how to get out of it.